Hey, this is Doug Sandler, producer of the Net Profit Podcast. We didn't want you to miss an exciting episode with Ryan, but Ryan is taking the week off. So here is a classic rewind of the Net Profit Podcast coming at you right now.
Welcome to the Net Profit Podcast with Ryan Kibler, your Net Profit CFO, helping business owners like you grow their net profit one episode at a time. And now your host, Ryan Kibler.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Net Profit Podcast. Today, I've got a very special guest with me. I've got Joe LoPresti with me. Now, Joe works at ClearPath Family Office. He is the CEO and founder of that family office and Arlington Wealth Management. I'm really excited to have Joe on the show today. He is very complimentary to what I do. He really operates as a personal chief financial officer, helping business owners exit their business and retire in the way that they want to. And so I'm really excited for today's conversation because Joe's got some great pointers for us there. So Joe, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the show.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we know that you're the founder of the ClearPath Family Office and Arlington Wealth Management, but I want to give you an opportunity, just update my audience a little bit about your path, your story, kind of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. So I've been in the wealth management industry for 40 years, believe it or not, and started out working for some of the bigger banking brokerage firms in the early part of my career. Pretty quickly realized that culture, more of a sales type culture, really didn't resonate well with me. So I started to branch out and learn my own methods and ultimately developed a proprietary investment management system that we still use today in our wealth management business. And as our clients became wealthier over the years, we realized they needed more than just investment advice. So we started to offer more comprehensive advanced planning in the areas of tax mitigation, lifetime cash flow planning, protecting assets from catastrophic risks, wealth transfer to take care of their heirs, et cetera. And we've more recently formulated that advanced planning, the non-investment planning, into ClearPoint Family Office, okay, which is a fractional family office. And ClearPoint works predominantly with business owners and coordinating their business strategy with their personal planning into a unified approach so they could achieve what's important to them.
For sure. Yes. And I think, all of everything you just talked about, so important. And I think a lot of business owners miss it. I think a lot of business owners, they work really hard and they build a business, they build up an asset. A lot of times they go out and they hire people and they start generating a lot of revenue, a lot of cash flow. They end up paying a lot in taxes. And they miss the part of planning on how do I exit? How do I mitigate my taxes? How do I make sure that I'm setting a legacy for my family? And I love that, you're helping your clients with all of those pieces.
Yeah, I mean, business owners have a lot of moving pieces in their life. And, I think they sometimes struggle in coordinating it all. They tend to work with advisors individually, an accountant, a financial advisor, an attorney, business consultants, et cetera. And they're the ones that have to take this, what I call siloed advice, right? Where, getting accounting advice, getting financial advice, but nobody's really coordinating it or reaching across the professional lines. So I think that's really important to get some unification behind all of the advice to really maximize the potential for that business owner.
Yeah. And just, a little background for my clients and a little more understanding for myself, that's really the whole purpose of a family office, is to kind of bring all these professionals together that they're experts in their specific field, kind of together, almost like a board of directors, right? And bring them all into one room and so they can all collaborate together and make sure everyone's on the same page in the best interest of the business owner. Do I have that summary pretty well correct?
Yeah, I think you do. I like to ask business owners, when's the last time all of your advisors sat around a table to talk about you and your agenda. And I tend to get, kind of that little blank stare coming back, because it just doesn't happen. Now, ultra wealthy, business owners have that. They set up their own family office, and they did it because of this specific concern that they have, that they wanted to get some sort of integration in the planning for their life. So they hire their own accountants, their own attorneys, their own financial advisors, and a lot more too, real estate management, et cetera. But our clients tend to be in that 5 to 75 million net worth, and it's uneconomical for them to set up their own family office. So fractional family office brings that elite model to the small and mid-sized business owner in an economical way.
Sure, absolutely. And I think so important to put all those professionals in the same room because they all have their expertise, but sometimes, as you mentioned, if they're not all the same page strategy wise, advice can kind of overlap. And sometimes, advice you get from like your accountant doesn't necessarily get along with the advice you get from like a legal professional, right? And so bringing them all together and understanding the implications of both sides at the same time, super, super powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I just imagine, if you're a business owner out there and you're thinking about this concept, you're probably thinking, wow, that could get really expensive in a hurry, right? If I put all these professionals in one room. But I think the benefits that come out of it is, and if you don't do it, you're still going to meet with all those professionals individually. You're probably still paying around the same price. And if you don't do it, you don't get the benefits of collaboration.
Yeah, you miss the collaboration, and that exposes gaps in planning. So I could tell a quick story about, I'll call this person John. John it was a business owner, and he, started to get serious about his advanced planning. So just in simple ways, right? Like setting up a living trust for his estate planning. So he worked with an attorney to do that. Didn't really have one that, that one came recommended to him. So we used that attorney, set up his estate plan, set up the trust, transfer the assets into the trust like the attorney recommended. Separately, he was working with his insurance agent about putting an added layer of liability protection by just buying a simple umbrella personal liability policy and taking care of, an accident from happening, right? And having an added layer of protection there. Sure. So, he's working late and he's driving home one night, gets into an accident with a motorcyclist. He was found at fault. And, other than the psychological damage that caused him, he felt some comfort knowing that he bought this liability policy and his assets are going to be, more heavily protected. Comes to find out that his trust is not named in the umbrella liability policy. Therefore, his trust assets were exposed to this liability. And that's just a simple matter of his attorney and his insurance agent didn't sit down together and discuss this. In fact, they had no idea that he was talking to these different advisors. So that's a pretty simple example of how siloed planning could expose gaps and dangers.
For sure. Absolutely. And then obviously open that client up to losing assets because the trust wasn't protected. And obviously, I'm sure that business owner worked very hard to accumulate those assets over time.
Yeah, exactly. So in a family office environment, you're going to have a personal chief financial officer, which is the role that I serve for my clients. And I oversee all of the business and personal planning. There's a business advisor that works with them on their business strategy and a wealth planning advisor that works with them on their personal wealth planning. And then we have attorneys and insurance agents and more the niche planners, specialists in the family office that we could bring into a relationship, but there's one team coordinating it all. And by doing that, there's less chance of having those gaps in planning and exposing dangers. But it also there's less chance that you'll miss good opportunities as well to increase wealth, because that happens, in other examples that we could talk about.
Sure, absolutely. And I want to dive a little bit more into, the part that you help business owners specifically, which is in exiting their business and also in retirement and, kind of cash flow afterwards. And we talked about, you and I before the call, finding what their freedom point is. So I want to dive into that. Talk about what a freedom point is and how a business owner can find that.
Yeah, freedom point is really, when you talk about business owners, the reason that most owners start their business is because they value freedom above everything else. They want to call the shots. They don't want to answer to somebody else. So freedom is really super important to them. But a lot of them don't really know how to transition from freedom as a business owner in a career to having personal freedom. So the freedom point is when you've accumulated enough wealth to do whatever you want, whenever you want, of course, within the bounds of reason, when you can live the life you want without worrying about money. And it's more than just financial. It's, having the freedom of time, freedom of relationships, freedom of purpose. It's about really securing that personal freedom. And that's what the freedom point is. So one of the first things we do for all business owners that we work with is we determine what their freedom point is. And there's a couple of steps involved there. First we have to determine, we set up what we call a lifetime cash flow plan for that business owner, right? To really look at what their needs and income sources are going to be, not just now, but through their entire life. So while they're in their career today, through the transition eventually, whether it's a sale or an internal transition, and then life after business, to really know what that's going to look like, where they're going to get their income, what they need to live the life that they want. And then we look at all of their assets, we look at their business and we value their business, and we show them this is what you need from the business to live the life that you want without worrying about money. And that's their freedom point.
Love that. I think, for all the business owners out there listening, I think that's a really important exercise to sit down and go through with their advisors and figure out, a lot of business owners, I think, well, I want to grow my business, right? And more revenue, more income, more money, more take home pay. But why are we doing that? Right. And I think finding this freedom point and that concept of, how much money are you going to need ongoing really helps define your why for why you're doing that, and probably gives you some clarity on where you're going.
Absolutely. We really try to have the business owner change their mindset a little bit. Now, certainly the business needs to provide for their living needs now, but we really want them to think about maximizing enterprise value, because at the end of the day, that's going to secure their freedom. And by maximizing enterprise value, it part of that is increasing net profits, right? So that evaluation of a business is going to look at profitability, certainly, but it's going to look at a lot of other things too. And I think a business owner that just focuses on growth, like, how do I get more income? Well, I need to grow the business. And yes, you could grow the net income that way and increase the valuation, but it's usually a marginal mover compared to working on the business and making the business more attractive from a outside buyer's perspective, because that's really what's going to determine what you'll be able to, get from the business, get from a buyer when you go to sell or when you transition it. What is it worth? That's the financial asset that's going to come your way. So you can leverage the value by focusing on the business, not just looking at growth and net income.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, and definitely a train I get on and preach for sure. I mean, it's not about what you make, it's about what you keep. And I think that's really, what I'm focused on helping my clients do is, how do we increase your profits through efficiency and working on the business, just as you just said, so that, we can improve the business, make it stronger financially, and then help you have a better exit, which again means more value, which is going to help the business owner personally in retirement for sure, and in their exit.
Yeah, it's going to help them in retirement. And what that freedom point, once a business owner knows that, it gives them clarity. It gives them clarity to their future. And some people find themselves, hey, I'm already at my freedom point. in which case you want to start making decisions a little bit differently, right? You want to, really go in to protect the value of that business. And that's an area that we focus on. Once we know what the value is, the first thing we'll do is assess the value and look at industry benchmark comparison. What are best-in-class companies? What are they worth? What is your business worth? Where's the room to improve it to get you to best in class? That's going to mean much more to your wealth than anything else. But if you're at your freedom point, the next thing we do is go into protect the value, conduct risk assessments, review your mitigation strategies, safeguard your business assets against catastrophic risks to just eliminate those biggest dangers. So if something happens, you're risking your freedom at that point, not just the business asset, but your personal freedom. So I think that's the first thing that you should really do once you reach your freedom point.
For sure. Yeah. And I think, I don't remember who came up with it, but there's the saying, if something can go wrong, it will go wrong. And I think, getting into this risk mitigation side, again, I think, some business owners out there definitely missed this piece of it too. Really getting some help there once you've, built up a business and you've accumulated some assets and the business has some strong cash flow, the risk management side and the things that could go wrong, protecting against those, just super important. And it's one of those things where if you don't plan ahead and do that, usually it's too late, by the time you need to, and you'll regret not doing it.
Yeah. 1/3 of all business owners are going to exit in an unplanned way. And it's usually from, the 5 Ds, the death, disability, divorce, disagreement with partner, things like that. So, nobody expects that's the way they're going to exit their business, but 1/3 will. So we always want to be ready. We want the business to be transition ready to harvest that value if one of those unplanned events happens. I think that's really important. And if you're not at the freedom point, then you need to go into enhancing value. We assess the business attractiveness, and this is where you come in, right? With the work that you do,
For sure.
Identify growth opportunities, develop a strategic plan to exponentially increase that business value. And that could, whatever, based on whatever timeline that entrepreneur has, whether it's, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is going to really influence what you're working on with value enhancement.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would encourage, all the business owners, I think, making it able to make a transition as soon as possible, right? How can you remove yourself from being the driver of the main activities? And, if you had to step away from your business for a month, right? How do you get it to a point where it still continues to run? Because that's going to, even if it's small, right? That's going to increase the value and attractiveness to a buyer.
I think that's one of the biggest variables that increases the value to a third party is owner dependency. Because if the business is really centered around you, it's not that valuable to a buyer, right? Your valuation is going to be a lot lower. And that's one way that you can enhance value by getting, you out of the center of everything. Because at the end of the day, a buyer doesn't want to buy a job, right?
Yeah.
They want to buy a business that is going to throw off cash flow and, they could have a good lifestyle. And it not only does it increase value, but it gives you a better lifestyle now. You don't want to just have personal freedom when you're retired. You want to have personal freedom now and be able to have more of those, spend the time with people that you want. And if your business is running without you, then you have that freedom.
For sure. Absolutely. And I want to go back to just for a minute, 1/3 of all business owners will exit in an unplanned way. It's a very shocking statistic for me to just kind of sit and think about, right? Is 1 in 3 will exit in an unplanned way. And you mentioned the 5 Ds, and I think those are talked about a lot. I think that's very interesting for business owners to think about, the next time you go to an event of business owners, a chamber meeting, what have you. I mean, you look around the room and 1/3 of them are going to exit in an unplanned way. It's very shocking to think about.
It is. And again, that's always, nobody ever thinks it's them, but It just happens, right? And so planning for that is very important. And it also increases your value, right? Because if the business is transition ready, even if you don't plan on exiting for 7 years, whatever it is, that increases its value. And, when we're working with a business owner, we're tracking that. We're tracking their net worth progression. We're tracking their enterprise value and how it's progressing. We're tracking their personal net worth to maximize their net worth. So everything we're doing on the personal planning side is about maximizing their net worth, but it's always centered around the life and legacy that they want to live, right? It's not just about having more money for the sake of having more money, but it's focused on maximization around the type of life that they desire so they could have that ideal life.
Yeah. And I think I think that's the most important planning that you can do. It's really for yourself, right? And again, I think a lot of business owners miss it. And, they got in business, they got a passion for what they do, and they wanted, like you said earlier, they wanted to have that freedom of choice of, controlling their own time, controlling what they do, controlling the money that they make. And, a lot of times they miss the long-term planning, living the life they want to live, and also leaving a legacy.
Yeah, there was a study done. It's been a little while now, maybe 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. They interviewed business owners that were planning to exit within 5 years, and only 6% of them were proactively looking at their wealth planning. They were so focused on the business, so focused on selling the business if they were in that stage, if they were in that red zone, and they miss. If you wait till the business is sold to do the personal wealth planning, you miss tremendous opportunities to maximize family wealth.
Sure.
There's, setting up your income stream for life after business. If you do that ahead of time, you could do it in a tax efficient way, which just keeps more money in your family's wallet. The tax reduction planning is huge. I think business owners, they work with their accountant and they determine, well, what type of tax do I need to pay to sell this business? But proactive planning through that process, if you do it early enough, there are ways to mitigate, even eliminate the capital gain or other related taxes on a business transaction. So that type of planning adds significant wealth to a family. There's wealth transfer methods that you could put in place if that's important to you on building generational wealth that you could set up pre-sale. And of course, asset protection is huge because now your assets are transferring from under a corporate veil, which has some built-in protections, to personal assets, which are more exposed to liability, to creditors, to other types of risks. So building in that multifaceted planning is really where I think a family office could come into play. If you compare it to conventional wealth management, I think it delivers more standardized advice and it's constrained by compensation models, right? Like a wealth manager, most of the firms they work for, they reward asset gathering, but not necessarily maximizing the business value, setting up the estate planning and the asset protection and the tax planning around the business sale. All of those things are more important than the actual investment management. Not that that's unimportant. It's just only a piece of the puzzle for a business owner. But sure, that's where most wealth managers kind of lead with that asset management, and everything else is secondary or even non-existent in the relationship.
Yeah, completely agree. And again, I think the tax planning and wealth transfer and how do we basically help the family keep as much money as possible if you're going to make an exit and, capital gains. I mean, all of that, I think you make an investment into professionals that know how to help you do those things. And you're going to see a fantastic return by being able to keep more of what you get out of selling your business. I mean, that to me is just, it makes great common sense, right? Great common sense investment that's worth doing.
Absolutely. And so it's not for everybody, but if that entrepreneur genuinely wants to maximize their potential, they put a lot in to their business, right? They're working at it 20, 30, 40 years and they don't, they want to maximize that. They don't want to, let piecemeal type of advice expose the gaps and dangers and missed opportunities. If that's you, then I think a fractional family office model is something you should look into, because it really brings, all the advisors around the table to talk about you, as opposed to you having to find best-in-class advisors to begin with, which could be difficult. And then you having to spend the time meeting with each of those advisors and then coordinating, being the quarterback, of the advice you're getting, which sometimes is conflicting, as you brought up earlier, Ryan. So I think that's a big struggle that most business owners have, is taking that siloed advice and putting it into a unified strategy.
For sure. And I would say, vetting those professionals too, right? I think if you've got, kind of the fractional family office model, I would say, most experts, they have their field of expertise, and they also probably know a little bit about, the other industries that are at the table. They're definitely not experts in those fields, but they can probably also pick out, the people that know what they're doing and the people that don't. And as a business owner, to kind of have some of those selections kind of made for you and have those people be vetted already, I mean, that's a lot of legwork and a lot of time that, as a business owner, while you're building a business, super, super valuable to have done for you, and really a method that's turnkey.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And having them accessible, right? So our family office has 75 specialist experts in areas of tax mitigation, risk mitigation, wealth management, legal, business advisory. And these are niche experts, right? So,
yep.
Let's talk about tax planning for a minute. The tax code's 70,000 pages or something ridiculous like that. There's no one accountant or anybody that could know that entire tax code. But these specialists work in just one little segment of the tax code, which may or may not be applicable to you. But if it is, it could save, 6 figures, 7 figures of taxes in a particular event, like a transaction, or through your lifetime. So having them accessible to you, to kind of put you at the front of the line, I think that's a big benefit as well.
For sure. Absolutely. Well, Joe, I appreciate you taking the time coming on the show today. I want to give you an opportunity. Where is the best place for my audience to find you, get connected with you, especially if they're, don't have a fractional family office already and they need one? Where is the best place for them to do that?
Well, probably the best place is the website. So that's clearpointfamilyoffice.com, and you could connect with me there. I'll also mention a book that I authored. It's called Exit by Design. And there's a website for the book where you could download an e-version for free. And that's exitbydesignbook.com.
Love it. Well, Joe, again, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the show today. I greatly appreciate it. And definitely learned a lot today. I would highly recommend to my audience, probably rewind this, listen to it a second time, and definitely reach out to Joe if you don't already have your own fractional family office. And until next time, everybody, go accelerate your profits. See ya.
Thank you for listening to the Net Profit Podcast with Ryan Kimler. Make sure to subscribe or follow the show on your favorite podcast app. Don't forget to check the show notes for our guest contact information and to connect with Ryan on his website, netprofitcfo.com.